Today's a good day to talk about police and to talk about what people have called profiling, the stop and search. Talk about that. There was the police just in front here, just making sure everyone is safe. But obviously, not everyone agrees with that definition of safety. Just going to wait here whilst people walk past. All right. It's raining and it's autumn in London, so what can you say? People say, oh yeah, that's the typical British weather. If it doesn't rain and it doesn't, then we don't have things to complain about. All right. So the thing is, people say there is this law about stop and search, and a journalist wrote something about it that, you know, black people are more likely, 3 times more likely to be searched by the police, and everyone's like, yeah, that's right, that's what we've been saying all along. It's racial profiling. And then the question is it really so? And others started to say, okay, is it really racial profiling? And then they got an official coming from the Met, you know, the police. And it's interesting what they actually had to say. Let me read the quote here. It says, sadly, different crimes affect different groups more than others. And it remains a tragic truth that knife crime and street violence in London disproportionately affects boys and young men, particularly of African Caribbean heritage, both in terms of being victims and perpetrators. And I think it's a fact. Most people would agree to that. Even people in the Afro-Caribbean communities would agree that there is a crime problem. And yeah, what are you going to do about it? But then the statement from the Met also said, we use stop and search the most in areas where there are highest levels of violence, crime, to protect our communities. We recognize, however, that stop and search can have a negative impact for individuals and communities, particularly when we get things wrong. Yeah, that is what I want to know. When they get things wrong. And I think that is the biggest problem. There was, I think, a YouTube shorts recently, and this guy, he was acting all tough. And everyone was like, well, he's all tough. And then the police stopped him and searched him, and he was on the floor, basically not all that proud anymore. And all of a sudden, he wasn't proud, and they popped him down, and just below his trousers there was this. They pulled out this massive knife, and everyone watching it was probably glad that happened. So I think even if you're Afro-Caribbean, you know, black of descent, or it doesn't matter how you want to categorize it. A lot of people are just pleased that police would, you know, remove criminals and gangs wielding knives, because there isn't anything worse than a mother, you know, getting the news that a child has died because of gang violence, crime violence related to knives in London. And so from that perspective, you think, okay, that's fine. And a lot of people agree. But now this is where it gets complicated. People are saying, what if you're racially profiled and they search you and they can't find, they didn't find any knife on you? You'd probably be pissed, thinking, excuse me, what have I done wrong? And this is where it gets complicated about when the police get it wrong. You've been illegally, well, not illegally searched, you've been wrongly searched and they found nothing in you. So is it a case of let's search every young black male because they have the propensity. And for example, do you get more searched if you're in an area like this in Brixton? Because there is a higher population of Afro-Caribbean people, Africans anyway, or is it like you're a minority in an area very close to, say, you're a minority in the area you live in, and some elderly person, a white person, looks at you and think, ooh, I don't know where this young guy comes from, calls the police on you, and then you become a suspect. So I think it can go really both ways, where a lot of people are saying, yeah, it's great, but then how do you target people, and what are the results? If the police search, say, 100 people, 100 black young men, and 50% of the time they were able to retrieve knives because they're up to no good, is that good enough statistics? And so if it's good enough statistics, fine. But then if your son, others have said, someone mentioned online that I think it's the way you dress that triggers the police searching you. But I think if racial profiling isn't too bad, but when something just happened here. A bunch of young people, I don't know what it is. Yeah, security just came out. Yeah, okay, something happened there. I don't know, probably some young guy went into the store to steal, and he just rushed out. All right, talking about crime and then something happening in front of you, that is not a good sign. And then people are like, yeah, I told you, this place, the police are writing racial profiling people in London because it's just one of those things that you do. All right, so others are saying, how do you determine who looks like a criminal? The way they dress? Is it a gang sign? But this reminds me of something in the US, where you have the Bloods and the Crips, and they were into gang activities, and so you have the signals where the way they dress, the colors, the tattoos for MS-13 and all these other groups. So it was easier for police to identify them. But this is London. You do have gangs, and especially in the more impoverished estate, where you have a lot of issues. So I could understand that with that in mind, there isn't always a visible sign. So sometimes what the police tend to do is, like, if there's a bunch of I don't know, bunch of black young men just walking around, I wouldn't say loitering, just walking around, because loitering isn't really a crime in itself. Just walking around, and sometimes I would say they look a bit fishy, dodgy, they might get searched by the police. And of course, in the age of social media, some of the young people would provoke the police, because that's what you do. And then people would film it. And once the police have been provoked and you film it, then of course you film the part that becomes that is more advantageous to you, where basically the police is beating you down, but you obviously don't put in the part. Everyone wants to know, what's the context? What happened before that? But of course, it's not always that easy to assess. And that is why when you're here, oh, that looks delicious. Talking about restaurants, I remember in the 90s when you're coming down places like this, most restaurants wouldn't even care about you and your what's it called, and allergies. But now, let me just go around here. and say they wouldn't care about your allergies, but now it's becoming, people are a bit more conscious of that. For what's it called, lactose intolerance and all these other allergies. Nut allergy is a big one. You really need to be very careful, because if you have that, you need to also be careful when you eat out, because most of these industrialized food, they want to give the food a little kick and put whatever it is in it, and that can really go not to your advantage. Anyway, so back to the story of crime in London, and what people are saying, and that, the idea of stop and search about one community. Then the data also shows that not all that they're saying, if say knife crime is very linked to the Afro-Caribbean experience, then there would be other crimes that are linked to, other communities. I don't know, phone snatching, you go to the Asians. I don't know, drug related, you go to the white community. You get the point. So it's stereotypes are often based on some sort of fact. It's just then when it starts to be used as a negative way of basically painting the whole community in a bad light, it becomes a problem. So now the data was, if all these people are being profiled by the police, does the Met also have data on other crimes? Do they profile in other areas people who are white people, other communities committing other type of crime? I think that's a valid question. And another thing is, what if, a lot of elderly people start doing crazy things or being drug mules like we've seen in some areas? Would the police also profile that age group, Anytime you see an elderly person pushing whatever it is, or just walking around and say, "Ma'am, excuse me, we need to search you," and then you get it. So I can understand that it can be annoying when you just fit the profile and they stop you, and then they get it wrong, and then you're upset. You have the right to be upset, and they have also the obligation to keep the community safe. But I think part of the problem is the way sometimes the news reports some of these, because it's rage bait. Some people have said, look, I've been stopped and searched by the police, and I didn't mind. They were really respectful, and they said, okay, we need to search you, the law and all these other things. And he was like, fine. They searched him, they found nothing, and he wasn't even worried, because I said, I don't really have anything illegal on me, so I don't mind being searched. But however, if it becomes a bit too regular all the time, it is annoying. And this reminds me of a brown guy who works in a very high profile area, and he lives somewhere in a Nordic country, and he lived in one of those Nordic countries, and he would need to cross on a boat. He has a really nice car, and every time I cross, most of these people know me, or when there's a near shift, they see a brown person in a nice car. Obviously they're thinking, ooh, he must be doing something dodgy. It never crosses the police mind, the customs or security mind that, well, maybe this guy is actually, he went to university, he's got a degree, and he's got a good job. So the problem with racial profiling is that you tend to just lump everyone into the same category. And if you go, for example, something that a lot of people wouldn't even bat an eye about is when people go to, when you see an elderly, someone in his 50s, gray hair, a male, and he's got a nice car, like, a Bentley, or especially if in his 60s, but his 60s, yeah, he's got a nice car, and you're like, okay, yeah, rich old white man, it never crosses your mind that he might be a criminal. For the simple reason that historically, most white men have always owned have always had the wealth. So it is just assumed that's the case. And if you come to, say, London, and you see someone in his 30s, especially a male, you know, Afro-Caribbean descent, and everyone's like, excuse me? What have you been selling the good stuff? No. Oh, it's sad. But the problem is there isn't any way. So sometimes you go by statistics. So if the more, like, for example, if you, I don't know, if you see a male nurse, well, it just feels, when you see a male health worker come into the room, you just assume he's a doctor. If you see a female, you assume she's a nurse, and she might be the doctor. So I think the history plays a part. I don't know, racism also plays a part with regards to profiling, but also the fact that crime, for example, I think a comedian in the US once said, there are crimes that you just know has, you know, white or black written all over it. It says drive-by shooting. Drive-by shooting is like, oh yeah, you know, that's a black crime. You know, it would be somewhere in a more black neighborhood. All right, serial killers, he says. Well, that's a white crime, you know. It's more likely, oh, someone embezzlement in a bank and, drains the bank resources. You just think white collar crime, more likely a white person. What else? And then, gangs, depending on that. If we say, the mafia, everyone is like, ooh, you know, Italians. What else? These are generalizations based on some historical reasons and historical facts. And when you take that away, sometimes when you say, someone says, I'm from the ghetto, often, mostly, you know, minority areas in the US, you know, Bronx is famous, Harlem used to be called a ghetto, but of course, the term ghetto wasn't even a black thing at the time. It came from during the World War when the Jews were persecuted, and they were in the sort of camps. They had basically, the camps were called ghettos. So there is that sort of history behind everything here. And so it's very hard just to then say, well, police profiling young people is a bad thing. But I think sometimes they probably take it a bit too far. And so if it's equal opportunity, so we're saying, if it's equal opportunity where they're saying, we know in this area there's this type of crime, and these are the most people who would likely commit that type of crime, and so we profile based on that. And then I think there'll be less outrage. But I also think most people in the community are not really mad about, you know, profiling, especially if the result is like they're getting 50% of people to especially when they stop people, and you know, it's a 50% success rate. So there is a bigger problem, and I think the media, I'm not saying the media causes the problem, but the media seems to stoke the flame and just make it a little more controversial, and I think that's not a good thing. But anyway, so on a wet street, on a wet London street in Brixton, talking about profiling, and anyway, let's move on.